Thanks, Premier. As you've heard, the situation in New South Wales continues to progress, and even though the majority of cases are from that Northern Beaches area, there are absolutely exposure sites outside of that area. Those exposure sites are sometimes busy places. There is every reason to think that there might be cases now emerging outside of the Northern Beaches area. And so these new restrictions, these new red zones for the Greater Sydney area and the Central Coast are really in place on the expectation that there is every chance that people will crop up as cases in the Greater Sydney area. And so we do not want those individuals travelling to Victoria unless they're returning Victorians, and our safety net for those individuals are that they'll be in home quarantine, mandatory home quarantine on arrival in Victoria, that will know who they are, that will be checking on their home quarantine situation, and that they'll require a test during their quarantine period. These are proportionate measures because what we see today in Sydney is not what the situation will be like a week from now. We know that when there are exposure sites across many areas with many, potentially hundreds of exposed individuals, that there will be new cases cropping up over the next 14 days related to those exposure sites. Not everyone who goes to an exposure site is infectious, but there will be some people who've gone to these sites who've been infectious, who've been in close contact with others in an indoor setting, potentially for a protracted period of time, and that puts other Sydney-siders at risk. And so we need to take a precautionary approach and make sure that those individuals are not travelling to Victoria unless they're returning residents. And for the returning residents, we're really wrapping the quarantine system around them to make sure that if they do become cases, we'll know about them. They'll have very limited opportunity to transmit to anyone else in Victoria. We do have to hang on to this precious COVID-free situation in Victoria. And even though we haven't got community transmission that we've flagged now, Victoria really is, or should be, on high alert. Anyone who's got symptoms needs to present for testing. Nearly 10,000 tests yesterday, that's fantastic. But from this point onwards, anyone with symptoms, sore throat, runny nose, fever, headache, feeling unwell, you really must get tested and isolate until you get that test result back. Thank you. Jerome.
Thanks, Brett. So since yesterday morning, we've introduced the permit system and current set of controls around people travelling in from New South Wales. We've had over 200,000 permits already issued in the last 30 hours or so, and I thank everybody who's gone through that permitting system. As a result, we saw 3,000 passengers yesterday arriving at Melbourne Airport and at Avalon Airport. All those passengers were individually met and checked to make sure they had the right paperwork with them and were not coming out of the hot zone or were not coming out of the wider risk area. As a result of that, 3 people were found who had travelled from the hot zone, and they are now in mandatory hotel quarantine. This, I'm afraid, is a reality now, and particularly as Sydney moves into the red zone from midnight tonight. Anybody who tries to enter the state from the red zone from Sydney or the Central Coast after midnight tonight will not be able to access the state. If they do try to get through, they will be facing 14 days of mandatory hotel quarantine. Those operations continue, of course, today. We're expecting 35 flights from New South Wales into Victoria today, around 3,400 passengers, and we will meet them and ensure again that they have the right permit and rights to be here. From tomorrow, we will, of course, support returning Victorians for 24 hours from midnight tonight until all the way through Monday. We will ensure that they are met at our airports as well as at our road crossings. As the Premier said, we're getting great support from Vic Police to ensure that those border controls are in place and that we can ensure that any Victorians who are returning from the red zone are given the appropriate support. Again, I say to those Victorians who intend to return tomorrow, you will have to get tested, you will have to undertake 14 days of home quarantine, and we will work with you to ensure that you do just that. Any Victorian who is considering travelling home tomorrow from Sydney needs to apply for an exemption permit. Those exemption permits will be available from late tonight on the Services Vic website. It is critical that you have that permit ready and completed at the point of entry. If you do not have it, you will be turned back or you will face mandatory hotel quarantine. I'd also like to just confirm that arrangements for freight, so we will have freight corridors set up to enable critical freight to pass through the state. There will be additional testing capacity set up to support the freight industry under a national protocol that ensures that freight drivers undergo continual testing in the same way as we've done over the South Australian border over many weeks. Furthermore, we are of course boosting testing capacity, particularly in the north and east of the state, to ensure that any people who are returning from Sydney and New South Wales are able to access testing quickly before they enter their home isolation period from tomorrow. Finally, just to reiterate the position for border communities, I can confirm that with immediate effect, border communities on both the New South Wales side of the border and the Victorian side of the border will be able to travel freely and repeatedly across the border. They'll be able to do so on display of their driving licence. I should, however, just warn everybody who intends to cross the border from today, and particularly from midnight tonight, there will be queues. As we set up the checkpoints from midnight tonight, people should expect significant delays for people returning into Victoria. So please allow extra time, make sure you have water with you, make sure you have your paperwork in place so that we can expedite the access process in order to safeguard the whole Victorian community. Thank you very much.
Very good. We're happy to take any questions you have.
Is it madness they don't have mandatory masks there yet?
Well, I'm not going to be a commentator on public health measures in New South Wales. We've taken this step because, as it stands now, the kind of baseline public health measures that we have in place in Victoria are in fact stronger than those that are in New South Wales at the moment. That's just a statement of fact. It's not a statement of judgment, but I think what the New South Wales government have outlined, they've announced some further steps today. They're largely of a advisory nature, and who knows how things will play out over the next couple of days. But I'm not going to wait around while they add to their rules. We are going to protect what we have built, and that is why the border will be closed from midnight tonight. There's an extra 24 hours for returning Victorians, but they will have to go into quarantine regardless. It'll simply be at home rather than in a hotel. But the basic message is a very clear one. There's no sense of offence meant by it. This is just about keeping all of us safe as a nation. If you're from Greater Sydney, do not come to Melbourne. Do not go anywhere in Victoria. And as far as Victorians are concerned, do not travel to Sydney. Do not travel to Greater Sydney. I can't be clearer than that. Because I can tell you, when you come home, you will finish up in mandatory hotel quarantine. That's no way to spend any time of summer, any part of summer. So these are not easy decisions, but they are on the best of public health advice. We believe they are proportionate, and we believe that it's appropriate that we take these steps rather than waiting for New South Wales to have a different set of rules in place. I can't control what they do. I can only control our border, and that's exactly what I intend to do.
Having the chance to have retrospect of the states don't have then, how strongly would you urge them to introduce mask or stay-at-home orders? You're obviously in this place quite a long time ago already and you have that.
Well, look, again, just as I've said, I'm not here to criticise other states, and I'm not here necessarily to be providing advice. The best thing I can provide is absolute clarity to the Victorian community about what the rules will be. Absolute clarity to anybody in New South Wales, from New South Wales, or people who've spent time in Greater Sydney. Do not try and come to Melbourne, because you will spend your stay in a hotel room. Locked up. That's probably not the best way to spend your Christmas. This is very simple. There's a problem in Greater Sydney. This is an appropriate response. But the other thing I can offer is any support whatsoever that we can provide to New South Wales, we will. I've already made that offer. Brett's speaking with Kerry Chant. The teams are speaking together. Martin Foley's talking to Brad Hazard. If there's anything we can do to support our friends and colleagues in New South Wales, we will. But as strange as 2020 is, I've not provided gratuitous advice, and I don't intend to start doing that now. That sort of commentary doesn't do anyone any good. They'll make their decisions about their state. We'll make our decisions about ours. We've built something precious, and we intend to safeguard it. And these measures I've announced today are an important part of that.
At what stage would you consider a WA-style hard border shutdown?
We're not at that point. All I'd say to you, the best way to answer any speculative questions like that is that I've always followed the health advice. We have always been driven by the data and the doctors and the expert public health advice from our team. I have no such advice. If I were to get that advice, then we would follow it. But I don't think that would be proportionate. Not now. We just have to wait and see how things unfold. And look, we're all very keen as Aussies across the country to see a sense of control come to what's happening up in Greater Sydney, not just in the northern beaches. It is happening across Sydney. There are exposure sites. Who knows, maybe it will be a handful of cases, maybe it will be more. We wish them well. We offer them our support, not just our moral support, but our support in terms of contact tracing, testing, whatever they need. We're more than happy to provide that support, and we've made that offer. Well, look, I can only direct you to the comments that I think the New South Wales Chief Health Officer and the New South Wales Premier have made, and maybe the Health Minister as well in their most recent press conference. The thing that always concerns you, if you've got 99% certainty where the infection started, so the person it came from via the genomic sequencing, you've then got a cluster or an outbreak over here, but all these links in between are missing, that's when you get worried. Because those people are potentially out and about, either are or were infectious, more likely were given the time sequence. It's always about what you don't know. It's not about what's visible to you. You can manage what you know. It's when things are happening unbeknownst to you despite your best efforts, that's when you finish up with you're not chasing hundreds, but you're chasing thousands of people. And any contact tracing system will face very significant pressure if you start to see that. I hope that's not the case. That's what we all hope for. But I've got to, using that precautionary principle, and following the advice of our public health experts, I have to assume that that's what's happening up there. And therefore, we can't have people from the Greater Sydney area coming to Melbourne, coming to Victoria. That's an unacceptable risk, and that's why the border will be closed. A hard border shut from midnight tonight. If you come here from Greater Sydney, you will hotel quarantine for 14 days. If you're a Victorian returning, you've got an extra 24 hours. You'll still have to quarantine, but you'll be able to do it at your home, and you will be monitored and checked. These are not easy decisions to make. No one's pleased to have to do this, but we've built something precious, and like all things precious, it's fragile, and I intend to safeguard it. Well, I don't know that it will be tens of thousands, to be honest. I think many people may choose to stay in Sydney. Some will have to come back. They're probably already planning to come back, for instance. We believe we'll be able to have, it won't be someone stationed out the front of their door, but they'll be repeated and random checks. And the penalties are very, very significant. The penalties are very significant. Plus, of course, you might become quite famous if you were to do the wrong thing. So for every reason, we think people, if they have to come back and they choose to come back, they can safely quarantine at home, but they will be monitored. They will be checked, and if they do the wrong thing, then they will be punished, and that is the appropriate thing to do. And, I'm sorry, I should say, and if they need support, care packages, scripts filled, all that sort of stuff, we will do all that. We've done it before, and we can absolutely do it again, and we will. So it's not just about compliance, it's also about supporting that person, that family, to get through that 14-day period. We've made a request. The State Control Centre here has made a request up through the usual channels. We've asked for 200 to 300 people to help us with the border. I haven't got an answer yet. As soon as I do, I'll be happy to pass that on.
What about the thousands of people? What sort of penalties could there be for anyone who is caught trying to break that road barrier? Will they be turned around, or is there
They'll be turned around in the first instance, Candice, but there are, if you are willful, if there were repeated attempts, for instance, there are significant fines. And they go from that sort of $1,600 up to about $5,000. If they go to court, they can go out to $10,000. The Victoria Police have powers to issue on-the-spot fines of up to $5,000. If they take you to court, if you're put before the court, then the number goes up to 10. If it's a business, then the numbers are much higher again. But none of those fines need to be issued. None of those fines need to be issued. What I've just said today, what you're going to report throughout the day, will leave no one in any doubt that if you're from the Greater Sydney area, you should not be travelling to Victoria. It's not safe to do that. And if you're from Victoria, I would simply say, please do not travel to Greater Sydney, because when you come back, you'll almost certainly find yourself in 14 days of hotel quarantine. That's not the preferred outcome for anybody. We all just have to use common sense. And use that precautionary principle. We're better to take this step now than not take it and reflect in a week or a month's time wishing that we had. You don't get any There's no second go at this, so we are going to make sure that that border is shut from midnight tonight. And the message in between, and for the foreseeable future, if you're from Greater Sydney, stay in Greater Sydney. Do not try and travel to Melbourne, because all you'll finish up doing is in a mandatory hotel quarantine room for a 14-day period.
What about the going on to get people who come from that red zone, end up in hotel quarantine, have to pay for it themselves rather than just
This is challenging because, of course, we have a framework where we can charge people who are returning from overseas. So at this stage, no, I can't make them pay for it. And that's another reason perhaps why I would encourage people not to be coming here, because you will put some strain on a system. A system's working very well. You know, we test our staff. We've done more than 9,000 staff tests since the system was rebooted. That's every member of staff every single day and their household contacts once per week. That's 9,000 tests. That means if we had a breach, and again, a breach itself is not something that you can ever have 100% prevention of. I've said this many times. It can never be zero risk. But our system is built in such a way that the virus would only ever have a one-day jump on us until we tested someone, a cleaner, a cook, a police officer, whoever it might be, ADF member, whoever it might be. And then we would have all of that public health response. We'd pounce on that no later than 24 hours after. So that's one of the features. So it's all going well. We'll kick up as well over the summer. We'll take more and more people, which is very important. But the last thing we want to be doing is having to put people in quarantine for 14 days who really did not need to be here. They're from Sydney and they should stay in Sydney. As for those who are coming back as Victorians, if you get in before midnight Monday night, tomorrow night, you can quarantine at home, but you will quarantine and you will be checked. So many people, I think, will make a judgment to stay in Sydney, but that'll be a judgment for them. They've now got a very clear choice.
Has Melbourne seen an uptake in, I know it's quite close to 10,000 yesterday, have you seen more people who may have been in contact with Sydney scientists or non-get people?
Well, there's certainly additional tests that have been done from those flight manifests where we have some confidence that there are a number of people who are here that have been in the northern beaches. They've been tested, they're isolating. There's a public health response been brought to bear on them. I think we started with a number of about 300. We've whittled that down to about 70 people that we think were in the northern beaches during the relevant time frame. They're all being closely monitored. They're being appropriately supported to stay away from others. And of course, there's a testing effort around that. But our testing numbers have been steadily high. Again, I just say out of this press conference and out of this announcement today, it's a beautiful sunny day. But if you've got any symptoms, the most important thing you can do for you, for your family, for every family, for our state, and indeed, because this is a national issue, for everyone across our nation, go and get tested. It is so important. And you'll get your result within 24 hours. If you've got it, then we will wrap support around you to keep, so that you're not infecting your family. You're not infecting an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent. Or indeed contributing to the spread of this virus across Melbourne, across Victoria. We know that would be deadly. That would be deadly. We don't want that. We've had too much of that. We've all got to play our part, and getting tested as soon as you register symptoms is the number one thing that Victorians can do. As for those in Sydney, if you're in Greater Sydney, stay in Greater Sydney. That's my message today.
Given the fact that most of the flights from Sydney to Melbourne originate in that Greater Sydney region, doesn't that mean that every single flight is full of people from the red zone?
Well, no, the red zone doesn't get declared until midnight tonight. So, yes, that's exactly right, and that's why anyone who is in those circumstances, who is a Victorian returning to Victoria, will have to quarantine at home. Anyone who's from New South Wales, well, they shouldn't have got a permit. They shouldn't have been on the flight, but we have seen a couple of people get through yesterday, for instance. That'll be a much smaller number, I think. They will go to hotel quarantine and they'll be treated as if they've come from another country. That's exactly the way that it'll work.
The COVID data coming up in the second wave here, is it hard to concede that it's not?
Well, I just politely say to you that concessions or otherwise about the COVID Safe app is not a matter for me. That'd be a matter for the PM. It's incredibly challenging. Look, we all know, Victorians have done it tougher than most, and we've shown ourselves, you know, to have the character and the courage required to beat this thing. But 51 days is not the same as having a vaccine. This is a very difficult time in terms of the impacts that it has on families when people wanted to be and had planned to be together. But it's also, if I just sort of step away from those issues and look at it in a more clinical sense, it's a very dangerous time. Many people are coming together, big functions, family gatherings, people are out shopping, all of these things. That's why masks at shopping centres are important. That's why the rules are in place here, and they won't be changing. We have hung on to these rules because we believe they serve a purpose. Is it convenient? Is it pleasant to be at Chadstone with a mask on? Probably not, but it plays a part. To be at Coles or Woolies with a mask on, you'd prefer not to, but it plays a part. All of these settings are there for good reason, and it is a difficult decision today, but this border closure is for a good reason as well, and that's to keep Victorians safe.
Have there been any discussions with Cricket Australia about Melbourne hosting the third test instead of Sydney?
We're always in discussions with Cricket Australia. I have no announcements to make about that, but if and when we do, we will.
Prime Minister's obviously been keen to have all of the border closures for Christmas. Spoken about this decision today, and I suppose why can't we necessarily trust that contact tracing system or the rigor you would have?
Well, I just a couple of points. Firstly, I've not spoken to the Prime Minister myself. I'll no doubt speak with him later today, but my office spoke with his ahead of the announcement today, because it's only appropriate that he know what we were announcing, and my office spoke with Premier Berejiklian's office as well before her press conference, just to make sure that you know, that's the way these things should work. This is in no way a commentary on any public health response. I've steadfastly not been critical of rules that are or aren't in place in New South Wales, and I wouldn't think it was fair or reasonable or even, well, fair or reasonable for people to be reading what I've just announced as a commentary on public health responses here. If the best thing to do is to prevent the cases getting here, not to essentially invite them in and then have to run around contact tracing people who should never have been here in the first place. That's the most logical, sequential, risk-based, and the very best response based on public health advice. If the Chief Health Officer didn't think this was proportionate and precautionary and the right thing to do, then we wouldn't be doing it. But he does, and we are. If you're in Sydney, stay in Sydney. If you're in Melbourne, don't go to Sydney, because when you get back, you'll be in 14 days of hotel quarantine. That'll put stress and strain on that system. It's not pleasant. It's not what you want to be doing. We just have to use some common sense and make sure that we do everything we can to limit the spread of this virus and do nothing that would add to the spread of this virus. As I said before, and I'll say this many, many more times, 51 days, amazing effort, something to be proud of. Let's all safeguard that. Let's all of us play our part to safeguard that.
Will you be treating people who are in hotel quarantine in Sydney as they are in the rest of the city? For example, if Victorians are doing a hotel quarantine in Sydney, wanting it home for Christmas, but they're not going to be out in the next day or so, will they be able to come home for Christmas?
Might ask the Chief Health Officer to speak to that. There'll be a day 11 test. There's a normal process to clear them from hotel quarantine, but they would then be travelling from the red zone. I might see Brett.
You know, there are always exceptional circumstances that we can consider, but it's going to be a very high bar. Those exemptions need to be approved by the New South Wales authorities, by the Chief Health Officer and her office in the first instance. But it's, you know, essentially for very strict, compassionate reasons. It wouldn't be out of convenience. It'll be on a case-by-case basis and in very limited circumstances, I would think.
So you'd most likely have to do 14 days hotel quarantine in Sydney and then come do the same thing there.
Well, if you've completed your hotel quarantine, it really depends on what the circumstances are in Sydney at the point that you're released from quarantine.
Can I ask on the two extra people who got the virus over what the circumstances are?
I don't know the demographic details for those individuals, but they're international travellers who've been tested and tested positive, but in hotel quarantine, no issues. Well, obviously we have to watch extremely closely what the epidemiology shows itself to be over coming days. It's not turned the corner yet, and I would expect more cases. The way that it's grown in the last few days. So I wouldn't recommend people travelling into New South Wales. You don't know the circumstances that you might be caught in, whether it's in regional New South Wales or in Sydney. Obviously, we're saying if you go to Sydney, you can't come back without putting yourself in mandatory hotel quarantine. You won't get a permit. For the rest of New South Wales, it's clearly low risk today, but we've seen Central Coast become a red zone from midnight tonight, and we've seen cases in Forster, north of Newcastle. So, you know, this virus gets around, and there's every potential for other areas of rural New South Wales to be seeded.
Can you pick up on people telling lies about where they may or may not have been in terms of the different zones?
There's always that opportunity. Those compliance checks can happen, and if people are caught out, those fines and penalties will apply. If people can't demonstrate that they have given accurate information on their permit, then they're subject to potential penalties. You have to give an address that's verifiable on the permit, and if you're lying on that permit, then you're subject to those fines.
I think it was mentioned earlier that 3 of the people who were flown into New South Wales had incorrectly said they hadn't been from the hot zone. How were they picked up?
So there were 2 unaccompanied minors who arrived in Melbourne. There was another individual who's a guardian. All 3 of them are in mandatory hotel quarantine because they were all from the Northern Beaches area. The guardian had been quarantining at home, but obviously went into hotel quarantine to look after those minors.
But there were 2 extras today, I think, from the red zone. Is that right, from that Northern Beach area?
No, they're the individuals I've just referred to. Yeah.
Has been in the news.
No. It does matter in the sense that if you can't find that link, that chain of transmission to every single person back to the original international traveller in quarantine, then there are individuals who've been out there who've been potentially infectious, clearly infectious to have started this cluster in the first place, who might have infected other people who are yet to be found. That's a concern. The obvious other concern is that there are just a number of exposure sites where infectious people have been with a number of contacts, casual or close contacts, who might develop illness over coming days. That's another significant concern. I'm also not going to be commentating from the sidelines. You know, my position on masks is that it's a very small thing to require of people. It makes a difference. The science is in on masks. It reduces the risk of transmission. I'd recommend it in any circumstances where people can't physically distance appropriately.
Any other issues?
Yes. Yep. Well, it's a good thing we've got more police than we've ever had, and that the academy's been full for the majority of our term in office. We know that, you know, pre-pandemic, our community was growing. There had been a shortage over a long period of time. I think that our predecessors hadn't really funded any additional police, so we've turned that around. And I just say to the criminal element, our police they're going to have a very busy summer, but you'd be unwise to think that that was somehow, you know, improve the odds of not getting caught doing the wrong thing, whether it's out in the suburbs or in Melbourne. Victoria Police have shown themselves more than capable of doing more than 2 things at once, and I want to thank Chief Commissioner Shane Patton and others. We had meetings right into the evening last night, and Victoria Police are very much on this, and I'm very confident that they'll be able to get that balance right between protecting community safety, fighting crime, but also an acknowledgement that there's no greater threat to community safety than this virus having seeded in New South Wales, Greater Sydney that is, then seeding further into Melbourne and our state. And that's why Victoria Police have been tasked with this important work, and they'll do it well. Can also, in advance, can I thank, there'll be several SES units that'll do amazing work supporting police, and we do hope that we'll get a favourable response from the Commonwealth in relation to those 200 to 300 ADF staff that we've asked for as well, but that's a matter for the Commonwealth. Yes, we are. Yep. We'll be able to give you a more fulsome update probably tomorrow or Tuesday, but we are rationalising those right down to a smaller number of hotels, and they will be not quite the same as hotel quarantine because they're not actually in a quarantine environment. They're in a restricted environment, if you like, and the perimeter of that environment will be very much more formally controlled. And beyond that, we'll be testing staff that are involved in providing services to those flight crew. The flight crew are tested themselves, but it's just about layer upon layer and just making sure that we've got the most risk-averse system possible. But this is a function. If you want flights to be coming here, they're principally loaded with Australians wanting to come home, then if you make all the flight crew quarantine in a formal quarantine in a hotel for 14 days, then there'll be no planes come here. You'll just run out of flight crew really, really fast. So we have to limit their movement. We have to have greater confidence that they're in one place or a small number of places. And we think that the changes we've made are very good. And I think you'll see that those changes will be reflected across all the international airports across our country. We won't be if we may beat that, we may match that. I don't think we'll be too far behind it if we're not. But the work is being done now, and obviously we have a smaller task at this stage. That will change though over time. We'll have a number of kick points where we'll add to the 1,200 that we've got coming in a week now. We'll jump up above that to play our part, as we always said we would. But that'll be a subject to further announcements on other days.
Yeah, so we have testing facilities at Melbourne Airport, at all the terminals now. That's up and running. They had a reasonably busy day yesterday. What we're saying to returning passengers, obviously from Greater Sydney, say, well, nobody's allowed to come back in from the red zone from midnight tonight. For those Victorians that are coming back in after midnight tonight for that 24-hour period tomorrow, Monday, they will be required to get tested immediately. We will be validating their test results for them, and we'll be phoning up with them every day to make sure those test results are in and they're isolated properly for 14 days at home. No, we're not going to do mass testing at the airport. The way we're approaching this is very much from a risk-based approach. If you are coming in from rural New South Wales, if you're coming in from the green zone, obviously we're going to continue to encourage you to monitor your symptoms very closely, to monitor how you feel, as we do with all Victorians, and to get tested at any one of our 180 odd testing locations across the state. We are putting some additional testing capacity into the north and east of the state to deal with particularly freight drivers and people who will be coming over the border over the next couple of days to make sure that they've got easy access to testing facilities. But yeah, we're going to rely on the whole weight of our testing environment. And just a quick, I would like to recognise, literally the thousands of people that are working today and that will be working over the coming days, not only in all of our testing stations, but also on the borders to ensure that we can return Victorians out of Sydney safely and effectively and make sure the rest of us can have a COVID-safe Christmas. No, that's right. So the amber zone will continue until midnight tonight, and from midnight tonight, the amber zone, Greater Sydney, will become the red zone. So we are revoking all the amber permits at midnight tonight as the red zone gets introduced. Look, the 3,000 people we spoke to at the airport yesterday who came out of Sydney were very supportive, very keen to do the right thing, and we'll be following up with them on their test results. And of course, we get test results within our systems within 24 hours. We can see if you've been tested, when you've been tested, what your results are, and we have all your details from the flight permit. So there is a very, very good system here to make sure we've got all that under control. Yeah, so there's already a national freight agreement that assures that the critical journey of keeping freight moving, especially at this time of year, can continue across all interstate borders. Freight drivers are already under their own testing regime. We'll continue to maintain that to ensure that they've got a good eye on their COVID status. There will be additional testing capacity near the border to ensure that the freight drivers can meet their requirements, and we'll keep those freights moving.
Any other issues? Thanks very much.